Welcome to another edition of Osteria IL Centro's My Favorite Bottle. I'm J.P. Gilmore of Integrity Wine. Today we're here with our special guest, Julie Hensler. Julie, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Julie, tell me how you first got into wine.
I've been with Hyatt for a little over 30 years, and the hospitality industry has afforded a lot of opportunity in order for me to really taste some really great wines and eat some really good food as well. I grew up really not knowing anything about wine, and when I was working on property at the Hyatt Regency Crown Center, they had the Peppercorn Duck Club, and probably back in the mid-90s, they did a series of winemaker dinners, and the first one I remember going to was a Beringer dinner, and the winemaker was there, and we had some of their higher-end reserve wines, and it was the first time that I could really tell a big difference in what I had been drinking, and knew that there was something special to discover.
Osteria IL Centro has recently won the Wine Spectator's Best Award of Excellence for their wine list for the 17th consecutive year. You were chosen to pick one of 17 best bottles from their reserve list, from their cellar. What was the bottle that you picked?
I picked Mount Veeder, and it's this really special wine to both my husband and I. We've been married for 3 years this October, and we had a very small wedding just with our family, and it was the wine that we served that evening. And we always enjoy Mount Veeder. It's very comfortable. It's not the most expensive bottle, but we know that it's a really comfortable, great wine that you're going to appreciate every time that you have it.
What are some of your other favorite wines?
I really like big, fat Cabernets. And Brent has turned us on to many, many wines. And I think actually Orin Swift, the Papillon, was one of the first wines that he really turned us onto, and where we bought as much that we could from him, and then my husband bought as much as he could find in Denver because we couldn't find much here. And then through that, we've become big Orin Swift fans. We also really like Silver Oak. We've been to their release day a couple of times in Napa in the first weekend in August. Every year that's their Alexander release, and then they do the Napa release in February. We haven't made it to that, but it's a fun day because you sit around and drink their wine all day, although you will notice that they serve women much smaller pours than they do men. So they give you your glass and you keep going back all day long, and so it's kind of a fun day. And some other wines that we really like Chapelet, and hopefully we'll be headed to their vineyard next month.
Julie, you've had the opportunity to do some really interesting wine travel. Why don't you tell me about that?
In 2010, we went to South America, and actually we got engaged in Buenos Aires. Then we went down and spent a couple of days in Mendoza, and then over into Santiago, Chile. And in Mendoza, we did 3 days of wine tours, and it was great because the hotel set us up with a car every day, and we could have never found a lot of these vineyards because many of the roads are all gravel and there's no markers. So it would have been really difficult to get to some of these places. But there were some really cool vineyards that we went to. We typically saw a boutique vineyard every day, typically a medium-sized vineyard that had a restaurant, and then usually a much larger vineyard. This one vineyard that we saw in Mendoza, it was called Wienert, and it was this amazing vineyard, and I'd never seen the oak barrels that they had the wine in that were quite as large as this. They have one that was probably the size of a sailboat, but most of the other barrels were probably the size of an SUV. And then they had all of the other wines that they had stored like back from the 70s, and none of them were labeled except with a notepad above that said the year of the vintage, and they were covered in dust. So whenever they pull those vintages, then they would have to then label them and write the year on it. So it was a completely different thing that you see in a lot of commercial vineyards in the States. In Santiago, we went to a cool vineyard outside of Santiago that was a organic vineyard, and they had llamas that were the fertilizing agent for the vineyard. So it was kind of a cool place to go as well.
You've also had some interesting opportunities for some wine travel in Europe. Tell me about that.
This spring we went on a cruise from Barcelona to Rome, and it was a smaller boat, and we were intrigued by it because Kathy and Adam Spragia were hosting a wine group. And there were only 650 people on the boat, but only 20 of us were part of the wine group. We started out in Barcelona, and none of us had met before, and we went to some really great places there, and Spanish wine is wonderful. We found this one restaurant that called Mam Vino, and they have 3,500 bottles of wine in the restaurant, and every night they open 50 bottles. And so they have 3 different levels of tastings. You can have a really small one, a medium, or a larger one. And so when they're out of those bottles, they're pretty much out of it. You can order, any of them as a full bottle, but that's their tasting bottles for the night. So that was kind of a cool thing, and we went back there a second time because we enjoyed it so much. And the cruise, we went different places in the Mediterranean, and when we were in Marseille, we went up into Aix-en-Provence, and we went to a beautiful vineyard there and had lunch. And I didn't really know that I liked rosé wine until that trip. So they had a lovely rosé, and I'm now a fan.
Julie, what do you say we taste some wine?
Sounds good.
All right, we have Whitehall Lane 2010 Cabernet Sauvignon Reserve.
Let's have it.
All right. And glasses have magically appeared. Let's have some wine.
Absolutely.
All right. So this is my first time tasting this because it just came in, was just released from the winery. So cheers.
Cheers.
All right.
What's not to like?
Wow, it's fantastic. So,
What's not to like?
and so probably the first time you've had the 2010 as well?
It is.
What do you think?
It's fabulous. It's fabulous.
Yeah, great vintage in Napa, and this is a little bigger than the 2009, I think. So they've got a little more structure, a little more fruit to it. So it's showing really well.
Beautiful legs.
Wonderful. And Osteria has a large selection of verticals, so different vintages of certain wines on their reserve list, and Whitehall Lane is one of those that they have multiple vintages of. Being in the hospitality industry, I bet you've had some occasions to celebrate with wine.
A couple of years ago, I signed a really, really big program for one of our hotels in Hawaii. And we knew that we were going to be finalizing it, so I went out with a customer, and we had a wine dinner on the beach, and her favorite wine was Opus One.
Wow.
So we had Opus One that evening, and the food was amazing, and the wine was spectacular, and the conference was 2 years later. So what we did was everybody signed a couple of bottles of wine that the hotel then put in reserve, so when she comes back for the conference, we're going to bring out the wines again. So that'll be this winter, so to pull those out again. So that'll be kind of fun.
So we've talked about work. Tell me a little bit about your family.
In 2010, I met the love of my life, Kurt. We actually went to college together, but didn't know each other, and we probably wouldn't have liked each other then anyway. I had a lot more growing up to do probably than he did. And we met at mutual friend's daughter's wedding. Follow that. And we just immediately clicked, and we both had a passion for wine, and he moved to Kansas City from Southern California. And instead of having a man cave, Kurt wanted a wine cave. So basically we put in a wine room in the basement and just finished that last summer, and Brent's been helping us stock it.
Tell me about some of the favorite bottles of wine that you have in your cellar.
As I mentioned before, we are fans of Orange Swift, and so we have a lot of Orange Swift in there. We also have some Cane, Frank Family, Sabragia. We have some Ayers, some great Pinots that actually Brent turned us on to, as well as some Hall.
When did you first discover Osteria IL Centro?
You know, I've been coming here for so long. It had to be in the mid-90s, and coming here for dinner and or meeting friends for appetizers, at happy hour with a glass or two of wine. My husband commutes to and from Denver, so we only typically have a very small amount of time on the weekends to go out. So we try to get here as often as we can, usually about once a month. He loves to get the orecchietto and the lamb chops, and I don't eat beef or chicken. I only eat fish. So I usually get either a fish special or I love the salmon here. So I'm never disappointed with whatever I order. And of course, never disappointed with wine.
Besides the wonderful food and wine, what are some of the other great things about Osteria IL Centro?
You know, it's kind of like coming to an upscale Cheers. You know, every time that we come in here, we run into somebody that we know because all of our friends come here. So it's really nice to come in and have the intimate setting that it has, and always knowing that you're probably going to run into a friend that maybe you've seen recently or haven't seen in a long time. And the service is always great here, and it's always worth the wait.